Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. We're just going to wait a little bit as everyone's joining in. I'm Claire from Cult Pens, and on this very dark and wintry night, in fact, it's been raining buckets here in Devon today, I'm delighted to welcome you to this colourful ink exploration workshop with Andrew Chorley, otherwise known to many of you as Penfriends UK. So before I hand over to Andrew, there's a couple of points of housekeeping to highlight, as we usually do. So we're anticipating the sessions to last up to an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. So do make yourselves comfy. The session is being recorded and we will make the recording available hopefully later this week, might be early next week now, given it's Thursday evening. So if you do miss something, don't worry, and we can ask Andrew to repeat, but also you will get a chance to have a look at the workshop again. So all cameras and sound are switched off for the duration of the session. But if you do have any questions at all, you can use the Q&A that should be at the bottom of your screen. So you can just ask a question in there. Amy and myself from the Cult Pens team will be on hand to answer your questions. And where possible, we will gently interrupt Andrew to pose some of these live as well. So we can keep the chat going throughout the session. We might also have a bit of time for some questions at the end of the session as well. So if you are ready, Andrew, I'm going to hand over to you. And perhaps you'd like to start before we get into the camera on the page and the art. Perhaps you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself and how your passion for pens and ink started out.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Andrew, better known as Penfriends UK. I started getting into the wonderful world of fountain pens about a couple of years back, and it was actually, it sort of harkens back to my childhood almost, but for the longest period of time, I hadn't actually been using fountain pens. But about 2 years ago, I was working in education and we had a no phones policy brought into our school. We couldn't use phones for communication or whatever. And I'd also been experimenting with dip pen art at the same time. So through the actual sort of communication aspect of needing to be able to write down messages for students rather than emailing them or using my phone to help assistively through technology, I started then exploring pens. Initially, I started looking into fine liners, but then having seen people like Nick Stewart experimenting with fountain pens and inks, I then started looking into what nibs could actually provide because I was finding that I was having to buy a lot of fine liners. And even though I still do use them on occasion, I just found that there was so much versatility to using a fountain pen. So whether it's, say, on a Sailor Pro Gear Slim, which we've got here, which I'll hold up to the camera. This one's got a zoom nib, so you can hold this at a multitude of different angles to get some different strokes and so on and so forth. To just some absolutely stellar Japanese nibs, which have got really ultra extra fine lines. There's just so much to the wonderful world of fountain pens. Now, fountain pens are great, but they're only great if you've got a good selection of ink. And so then began my sort of artistic journey into collecting ink. Now, my ink collection is quite small. It's only around about 40 inks, and I know people which have got hundreds, if not thousands, of bottles of ink in their collection. So the purpose really tonight of the workshop is to think a bit more creatively about how we can go about swatching, how to be a bit more analytical about just exploring ink, and then finding something a little bit more tangible to actually come up with something a bit more artistic. Now, for anyone who has been following me recently on my Instagram feed, you'll have noticed, if you could kindly spot my hands, you'll have noticed that I've actually been doing some fountain pen ink drawings, which I've actually got here. So this is one which is a work in progress, being set out with a fine liner. This one is in mid-progress. And then I've got a variety of different examples of what we're going to be potentially looking at doing tonight. So we've got some new ink from Dominant Industry. This is their Sunset, which is a shimmer and sheening ink. You may not be able to see it so well on the video here, but it is an absolutely stellar ink. We've got some Romania Red, which is beautiful. Tasha Sabi Midori. So I've been exploring ink in a slightly more creative way. And the reason why I've been doing this is to really be able to see what the inks are capable of in a multitude of different pens. So here we go, we've got some Kobe ink here, which is a really nice sort of concrete color. Diamine Ancient Copper. And then probably one of my favorite all-time inks, which is Diamine Oxblood, which is what I've recommended. And then last but not least, a standard cartridge, which came in the Platinum Preppy. So what you're going to need tonight, hopefully you have got a list of recommendations. You're certainly going to need a ruler, a compass, a pencil, and a eraser. I did give you a list of some particular brands, but if you haven't got those brands, don't worry, you won't necessarily need those, as long as you've got some of those items. And last but not least, you'll definitely need a fountain pen and some of your favorite ink. So let's get going. On the top is a very typical way of doing swatching. You do a little box and you write your name next to it. That's great. There's no problems doing this whatsoever. In fact, there's no right or wrong way to go about swatching. But what I think is quite interesting is when you start laying them closer to each other and then using maybe like a color wheel, which is I've got here on the left-hand side. And what we're going to go about doing to start with is maybe having a go at drawing some color wheels. And then I'll probably be using a paintbrush to actually apply the ink, just because of time, and you can always explore essentially what you want to do in your own time. And then I've got a multitude of different pens as well to help with that. Then on the right-hand side, I've got another color wheel. This time it was done with a paintbrush. And what I think is really, really interesting about using fountain pen ink is dependent on what nib you're using, the qualities which you can get from ink. So this has been done with a paintbrush, and you can see that the colors are much richer. The Sailor Ink Studio 224 certainly is showing a lot more of the purples and the greens. The Manio Nadeshiko is again showing a lot more variants. And then if I go back on here where I was using a fine steel nib, the colors are much more muted. So you can really sort of explore the actual capabilities and really push them dependent on the art which you're doing. Okay, so what I'm going to do to start with, I'm going to grab my compass.
Andrew, sorry to interrupt you just to get going, but we've got a question. I was going to ask you what notebook you're using there.
Oh, okay, so
starting point, and what paper that is. And we've also had a question from an attendee about paper as well.
Yeah, okay, that's a really good point. I'll talk a bit about that before I start. Thank you for reminding me, actually. It was something I'm meant to talk about. So the paper which I'm using here is Romania Red. It's from a company called Pebble Stationery, and this was one of their limited edition runs. I love Sakura, and so I bought it. I like Romania Red paper. It's really good for showing off the qualities of fountain pen ink, but you can also use a multitude of different papers. And the great thing about paper is it can really express ink in different ways. Now, this is quite a creamy paper, so you're going to get a slight color shift, and you might want to consider using white. Again, you're going to get a slightly different color shift, but that's really just down to your preference, I feel, at the end of the day. The other reason why you might want to explore different papers is that certainly when you're looking online at places like Mountain of Ink, which is an absolutely fantastic resource for exploring inks, your monitor, your phone, even looking at my phones, my iPad's definitely a lot more yellow than my iPhone. You don't get a true representation of what ink really looks like until you get it into your own hands and you start swatching. And I feel as an artist, swatching is really, really important. If we have a look at the top here, just very quickly, we've got the Sailor Manio Nadeshiko, and that was done with a glass dip pen. And you're just getting all the purples in there, which is lovely. But when you look at the reality of using it in, say, a fine steel nib fountain pen, you're certainly seeing a lot more of the grey blues coming in. And likewise, when you start using a paintbrush, you then start seeing the actual some richer saturation as well. It's sort of a halfway in between point of using a glass dip pen. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Sorry, what was the next one?
Well, it's just, I think you led into it really nicely about the impact of different types of paper and any preferences you have. So obviously you've referenced that one, but what other papers do you like?
I'll go into a little bit more depth if you don't mind about the paper. Papers come with different coatings, and I believe Nick Stewart talked a little bit about this in his fantastic workshop. If you take a watercolor paper here, that was Mountain of Ink. If we have a look at this paper here, this is watercolor paper. It's going to really absorb in the actual ink, and certainly for heavier applications, watercolor paper really can't be beat. But you're not limited to using watercolor paper. I mean, Tomoe River is always an exceptional paper to use for writing. For artwork, I tend to steer clear of it, unless I'm just swatching and I really want to see what the properties of the ink is like. But one of my favorite papers is actually Midori. It's quite thin, but it's really good. You can get really ultra extra fine lines on it. You can still get the qualities of your ink coming through, and it's fairly affordable. I believe they sell it on Cult Pens as well. Yeah, I think of all the papers out there, it's a really good happy medium to sort of look into. There is other paper companies out there. You've got Mitsubishi Bank Paper, which is great. And you've also got, which I'm going to be showing you a little bit down the line, one of my other favorite papers is from a company in Japan, and this is, what was it called? Hang on, mine's going back to me. Cosmo Air Light. That's it, Cosmo Air Lights. This is a really nice paper. It's quite prone to collecting your oils from your hand, so you have to be a little bit more aware of what you're doing with it. But it's a great paper, and it shades quite flat. You almost get like a ballooning on it, and I'll show you certainly when I come to do some sampling in a moment, the effects of the different papers in action. So I've got some pre-done. Now, if you haven't checked your email when you joined, at the bottom, I have actually given you some colour theory guides, and those guides are there for you to print off, use to trace, or use a compass and then set it up this way. So that's something for you to consider. Okay, so let's grab my compass and I will put in a fine liner, and then we're going to get on to doing some swatching. Okay, is there any other questions whilst I get set up?
I think we're good for now. What fine liner are you using there, Andrew? What are you putting in there?
Using a Sakura fine liner. I mean, to be honest, most fine liners are pretty decent.
Yeah.
I like Sakura just because it's in keeping of my sort of love affair for the flower.
Very nice.
I know. Okay, so I'm going to do it on a fresh page because it's quite see-through, this paper. So we're going to start off just by drawing a circle halfway in the page, like so. Now, what you might want to also consider doing whilst you're actually doing this is making some observations, writing down your observations, maybe even consider doing a journal based predominantly on ink, having one just dedicated to your observations like drying times, what your rating is like, and maybe do 2 colour journals or 2 swatch journals, because again, you know, what I swatch on here would be entirely different to perhaps what I swatch on Midori. So I'm now going to get another of my favourite items, and this is a really fantastic ruler. It's another fantastic product from Midori, and you can actually do some quite interesting things with the actual degrees on there as well. But I digress. So let's get this segmented up to start with. Now, another thing you might want to consider when you're actually doing your journaling is looking at complementary and harmonious colours. Now, the colours which we got on this side are definitely harmonious. They're all in the blue range. Harmonious colours being that of what's next to each other in the colour wheel. But this is just really keeping it to the blues. So what I might want to consider is the yellows, the greens and the blues together. And then maybe considering doing something about complementary colours. So if you're trying to do something a bit more artistic and you really want something to stand out like a title, complementary colours are definitely going to be your friend. Okay, so we're going to do some complementary colours on this one, I feel. This isn't going to be in any particular order, but I'm going to get blues and reds going. So I've got a Santini pen up here. I've got my Progia Slim. So let's get going with this. And the lovely thing about using this Tomoe River is that it's quite easy to shade on. And you can cover quite a lot of area with it. Now for the other part, I am actually probably going to use a paintbrush just because of time. But
what nib size is that one, Andrew?
This one is a zoom nib.
Right.
So the zoom nib is really versatile. If I go onto the reverse, we'll notice how fine a line I get. Then if I hold it perpendicular, I get a relatively thin line. And then if I hold it closer to the page, I get a really good shader. Now, Sailor used to do a zoom nib, which was even more accentuated. The modern ones are definitely a lot rounder, and you don't necessarily get the same sort of feel as the traditional ones, but which is a bit of a shame. But you can get nib grinds done to actually have this sort of luxury, I would call, because let's face it, fountain pens are a luxury item at the end of the day, aren't they? Now, what I love about this this actual ink here, I don't know if you can see it, but it's starting off quite blue, and then will start going into some greener shades. It's a bit more prominent on the Midori paper, but it's a really fascinating ink to watch dry. Never thought I would ever say that in my life. Watching paint dry, it's quite fun, but yeah, it's a really, really gorgeous ink. This is Tassia Sabi Midori, and it's definitely one of my favorite inks.
And it's not one actually that we stock currently, but it's one we're looking into, as well as I know the other one that you mentioned, the Dominant Industry we've been talking about. We're exploring that one as well, so we're hoping to have them at Cult Pens soon. Oh,
brilliant. I'll look forward to seeing those. They are fantastic inks. The illustrations on the packaging are almost works of art in themselves. So I'm just going to get my ox blood. Sounds so weird saying that, doesn't it?
no oxes were hurt, were harmed in the making of this ink.
I do love the creativity which some companies come out with their inks, especially with Diamine. Writer's blood, I think, is certainly a really interesting concept. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to swatch the red next to the green, and I just think the color matching of these two inks next to each other are just absolutely superb. And certainly for artwork, having complementary colors is definitely something to consider. Like I said before, if you're doing titling or something like that and you really want a color to stand out over the top of something, yeah, Oxblood is just absolutely fantastic. And what I would do after I've done this is I would maybe consider writing down a few notes, just to write down observations, drying times, maybe even like a rating or your thoughts on the actual ink. Because, I mean, our thoughts can change over time, but it's always nice and refreshing to actually look back at a journey and actually really think about, your past and where you've come from to where you are now. I certainly know from my sort of fountain pen collecting, my collection and thoughts and tastes have certainly changed over the years. Now, what I'm using here is a liner brush. absolutely fantastic for control, and you can still load up quite a lot of ink into it. Now, you will also notice that the actual marks which we get on here are much softer. So dependent on the actual area which I'm having to paint in, sometimes I'll consider using a paintbrush to actually paint with rather than actually using a fountain pen. It's just dependent, as I say, really on how big the piece is.
And what brush are you using there, Andrew?
So this is a De Laroni System 3 script, and it's a number 1.
A number 1. So do you find that one of the questions that's come in is that does that work as a similar sort of effect to fountain pens? Is there any particular size you would suggest people go for with this?
Really dependent on the size of the artwork which you're doing.
Yeah.
Certainly you use the brush or the tool to the size which you're working at. If you forgive me for a second, I'm just going to go and grab another piece of artwork, and I'll give an example of why I might consider using a larger brush.
Okay.
Because ultimately, this one did take a very long time to do. So I'm just going to put this underneath the camera and move the artwork. So this one took a considerable amount of time. And I did use a mixture of paintbrush and pen to do this. This one was done on Cosmo Air Light. Thank you, Penny. Lovely to see you here. So yeah, this was done with a mixture of Diamine Oxblood, and then I used some Pelikan Edelstein. What was the newest one? Golden Beryl. That's it. So I used that for certain aspects, and then I actually used some gold watercolor paint. But you can really see just up here where I'm pointing how the pooling completely alters to perhaps closer around the actual bird. So yeah, it's really interesting from that perspective, and it's completely different to perhaps say doing woodblock printing or printing in general, where you get very flat coloring. I love using fountain penning just purely from that sort of variance in which you can get. So let's just get a little bit more paint onto the brush. I'll just finish that one off. But certainly exploring ink in an artistic manner, I think is, even if you're not an artist, it's something which you might want to consider, because there's just so much variety out there. And by doing line art, you can just see just immediately how it might have an impact on your writing down the line as well.
And is this something, Andrew, that's something that we've been seeing that's growing in popularity? But is that something that you're finding as well from when you started? Yeah,
I mean, dip pen work has been done for the longest of times, and I think certainly the premise of using fountain pen ink, certainly from Nick Stewart's workshop, he has been such an advocate for using fountain pen ink to encourage other people. And certainly on forums, I've seen more and more people actually getting into fountain pen arts as well. And the really interesting thing is just how reflective the community is in actually having a go at doing something. So now we've done that, what we're going to do on the top one, we're going to do the same again. I'm just going to grab my couple of pens which I was using. If I've got the right ink in here, let's do a swatch. Yep. We're not going to do something a little bit more artistic in the top two, because sometimes having white space around the two will often give a slightly different effect. So we're going to do some Sakura Petals. So I'm just going to need to dip this into some ink. It's running a little bit dry. And then I'm going to do the same again on some other paper. So this same exercise 3 times. There we go. Perfect. Let's just do the center bits. Wonderful. And as you can see immediately how much darker that red looks like in just using it in a fountain pen as opposed to using it in a paintbrush. I think that's really fascinating.
It's much darker, isn't it?
Much, much darker. And also the other thing we have to consider is that, you know, we don't use our pens on a day-to-day basis. And at times inks will dry up and, you know, just go a little bit darker. So yeah, it's quite interesting from that perspective that we can get completely different effects dependent on how long we leave ink in a pen. I'll just do one more down at the bottom. And the lovely thing about doing this technique is actually drawing these flowers. They're not actually complex. They're not complex at all. Yeah, so the white space is also, it's nice to actually leave white space because it's not something which I think people are generally accustomed to seeing in artwork.
Yes.
Let's just get this shaded in a little bit. Now, this sort of process can take up to an hour on about an A5 piece, or it can take quicker, just dependent on how much you put in and how much you're wanting to shade. But it's something really nice to sort of fall back into after a stressful day at work and just lose yourself in the artwork. This red in my Santini is just so much darker than that on actually just applying it flat, quite noticeably.
Yeah, that's just looks completely different.
Absolutely. And, you know, again, you know, when I go on to the Midori paper in a moment and the Cosmo Air Light, you'll notice that, again, the properties will change. And what I'll also do is I'll further demonstrate that with another pen, which I'll just dip. And you'll see the difference between, say, using a gold nib and a steel nib. And using ebonite feeds and plastic feeds will often, again, change the saturation value of your inks as well. Another thing you might want to consider when you're doing this is going on to the reverse, just to get your fine lines. It's, sometimes, you know, when you're watching reviews online, you'll see people talking about reverse writing. You ever think to yourself, well, why would I ever do that? Well, for this reason, to be honest, I can't really think of many other reasons why you might want to reverse write unless you really need something ultra extra fine. Might be that there's some papers which aren't particularly fountain pen friendly, and actually reverse writing saved me on a number of occasions. It's something which some people quite often overlook.
And I'm assuming when you're doing that, Andrew, I always worry about damaging the nib, but as long as you're gentle,
absolutely,
then that's okay.
We've got sort of vintage fountain pens which have you know, been in existence for 60, 70 years plus, even up to 100 years, and they still. One thing which I always get in work is, oh, but if I give you this pen, won't that damage the nib? No. I mean, most modern fountain pens use an iridium tip as opposed to vintage fountain pens. And unless you've been writing on sandpaper, which I wouldn't recommend doing, you won't damage it just by loaning a pen to someone. So I'd always encourage you to loan your fountain pens to people. I know there's often a lot of people would say, no, you shouldn't loan your fountain pens, you'll never get them back. But, you know, if you don't get them back, just hope you're giving them a cheap one. Don't go loaning them. So we're now going to be doing the same again with the lovely ink in here from Tasha. I'm just doing this very roughly and very quickly. We have spent a lot more time and care and attention on doing this. And I would invite you guys to join in and have a go at doing this.
Yeah, hopefully we've got some people joining in as we're going through. And we'll talk a little bit about sharing artwork at the end, little competition prize as well. We'll come back to that. But I'm just looking at that colour, and that's much more consistent with the lay down you did at the start compared to the Oxford.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing the difference that the sealing of a pen can have on a fountain pen. You may or may not see in there. There is an inner pen incredibly wet for a very long time. I've left this pen purposely for about 3 weeks, not in use, and it's writing absolutely wonderfully. And when I do my fountain pen reviews, which you may or may not have seen on YouTube, I do often purposely leave pens for a period of time because there are, manufacturers which just don't have access to the same level of tooling and machinery to be able to do this. And it's quite interesting to be able to see how safe a pen is to actually leave for any given period of time. Because let's face it, we're not all perfect when it comes to inking up fountain pens and using them on a daily basis. I mean, I'm terrible. Pretty much the entirety of my collection is currently inked. But I'll worry about that when it comes to it, because when I'm getting ready for work in the morning, I just want to pick up my stuff and go and have a nice choice in work.
Definitely. And we just had a question about the ink, just to remind us what ink that blue is, please.
So this is a blue green, and this is Tashia Sabi Midori. So it's a blue green ink, and you will get a little bit of red sort of sheen coming onto it. It's absolutely gorgeous. I love this ink so much. I don't know if you've ever seen Tono and Lim's inks, but again, Tono and Lim's, they've got some absolutely fantastic, unique fountain pen inks, and they've got a series called Kaleidoscope, and they're very similar to this, and they will go completely different colors. It's just like watching magic on the page.
Love that.
So we're almost done with this, and then we'll go on to doing it on some Cosmo Airlight, and then again you'll see a little bit of difference. Yeah, always try to implore people, go beyond blues. I know I'm using predominantly blues tonight because it's, again, what I can really use in work. I don't know about you guys, but we have quite a strict blue-black ink policy in our work because I work in education, which is a bit of a shame. It's a bit boring. But there are many wonderful blue inks. There really is. Now, I'm just going to bring this lighting a little bit closer so you can see that a bit more. Hopefully that's a bit better. And if you would like to see further examples of my work, I have got them available on my Instagram. Okay, so I'm just going to put this one to the side. And then we're going to go on to doing the same again on some pre-prepared circles on Cosmo Light. For this, I am actually going to try and I'm going to rest my hand on the actual booklet because this one does pick up on oils. I'm just going to move that in a bit. Fantastic. So
you're trying to avoid putting your fingers on the paper.
Absolutely, yeah. The problem is, and I'll demonstrate it down here. If I just put my fingerprint down here, may not work. Yeah, you may see that the ink is sort of skipping over certain places, and it's not because I haven't actually put down ink on it. It's just that the oils of my hand is repelling the ink. And that's the only problem with this paper. But other than that, it really is absolutely superb. So what I might do on this one is a similar sort of thing again, where I do these little flowers. And the reason why I'm talking about this tonight is to try and get people out of the monotony of actually just putting down a swatch of colour. Now, for a lot of people, I'm sure they'll just love doing that, and they'll continue doing that until they're, 6 feet under, and that's no problem. But if you really want to try and actually explore your inks, doing things like some very simple drawings, like I'm doing tonight, is a really wonderful way to sort of see what the properties of those inks are truly like. And I don't know about you, but certainly on my side, I'm actually seeing a lot more blues coming through on this paper. Could just be my eyes, but certainly seeing a lot more blue coming through on this than the greens.
It looks slightly darker, maybe a little more depth than on the other paper.
Yeah, so it's just really down to the coating of the paper at the end of the day, to how your ink will react. And it's, again, I'd really like to stress the fact that when you buy fountain pen inks, don't just buy into one manufacturer of paper, because I feel that you can miss out on certain properties of ink and that to me, that would be a shame. This again is shading completely differently. It's shading a lot flatter. I'm not picking up on quite so many sort of brush marks or pen marks on the page. And it's partly why I actually enjoy using this at times. It's because it does it does shade quite flat. And it doesn't really show the actual pen marks, which some people actually really like. Some people don't like seeing the scratchiness of the Midori paper, but I do find Midori to be very, very consistent. Okay, so that's the inner circle done. And you'll see that as it starts to dry, I'm getting a lot more haloing on this paper in comparison to when I was doing it on my Tomoe River. So let's just go back to that page. On the Tomoe, I certainly wasn't getting as much pooling. It was going down quite flat. Whereas on here, if I just move it into the light a little bit more, you can definitely see there's a lot more pooling of the ink, which is quite interesting. It's, again, another quality which into showing the difference of maybe using a freshly dipped ink. I'm just going to literally dip it in as if I'm just testing the actual pen. Some paper at the ready, just to clean it off. Wonderful. Let's put the ink on before I have another ink explosion, which I had earlier today.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about that, Andrew? You were just telling me about that before we started. I think everyone will relate to that.
I had a little bit of an issue earlier when I was doing some swatching. I was exploring some ink, and unfortunately my carpets actually explored the ink more than the paper when I went to go and put on the lid. I'm sure I'm not the only person who's done this, but yes, I spent the better part of an hour cleaning my jeans, cleaning my legs, and cleaning the floor. And it was a sheening and shimmering ink from Colourverse. Oh, we've got a nice blob. Yep.
Yeah, I'm sure many of us have had that experience.
Other than the blobs which have just come on the page, which I'm going to leave. Again, you can see how much lighter it is actually using it fresh rather than sitting in the pen for a while. Now, for some people, they might prefer the darkness of the actual ink. It's entirely up to you. Perhaps.
I love those two blobs you've got on the page, as well as part
unintentional. We'll call that wabi-sabi.
I love that. Yeah.
It really highlights the fact that you're using a fountain pen, doesn't it? Rather than a...
Authentic, I think the word is, isn't it?
Yes, I like that. So I'm going to leave those ones to dry in. I might try and swatch it. But again, shading really quite flat. If I bring up the artwork, which I did beforehand, you can definitely see that it's a little bit lighter than it is
Definitely.
to the artwork itself. So again, that really highlights the difference of using different fountain pens with your inks. After I've just shaded a little bit more of this circle, I'm not going to do the entirety of the circle just because of time, and I don't want to bore you guys with just shading, because I'll lose myself into this and I won't talk, and then you'll just be staring at a screen.
It's very relaxing though, Andrew. I have to say, I'm losing myself with you a little bit just watching.
Oh, good.
So it's fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, you're most welcome. I haven't quite got doing happy little clouds yet, but maybe next time.
When whilst you're doing this lovely delicate piece of art, what's the largest piece you've done?
I have gone on to A3 in the past, but that is a bit of a mission. It's just really time consuming. Going bigger than that, I wouldn't use a fountain pen. I would still consider using the ink, but I would really be wanting to paint that. So the purpose of this really is to just actually explore ink with the fountain pen. Now, if you do want to go bigger than this, feel free to do so. So last week I had a Diamine Sherwood green bath. Well, that sounds disastrous.
Although great colour choice, I have to say.
Very nice. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I would also be peering over my glass just to make sure I'm getting the edges perfect as well. But it's really nice just seeing how these colours are working together. And by doing small swatches like this, if you're preparing for doing artwork, again, you're not going to have too much of a problem with then deciding what sort of colour choices to go for doing something a bit more full-blown. Traditionally, I've always kept to just doing one colour, but I have been trying to sort of push the boat a little bit and explore ink in complementary colours. So that's something to have a look out for on my feed down the line. I've got a few pieces of art on the go at the moment, and I'm just going to show you one which I've done earlier. So I'm just going to move that to one side. And again, I'm just going to grab a bit of artwork. I'll just stare at my desk for a second. But this one here, which I'm just bringing over, this was part of an autumn themed ink exploration. So we've got 3 autumnal colours. We've got Tassia Bendetucci, we've got the Diamine Oxblood, and then we've got Robert Oster Peach. And I just think it's a really nice way to have something a little bit more simple to actually get your teeth into, and a really nice way to sort of show off inks in combination next to each other. And again, your ink explorations could then become artworks in themselves. You know, you might even want to consider framing it, putting it in your room. So just from actually testing your inks to having something a little bit more tangible, I think it's just something to really sort of take into consideration.
They look beautiful. So, love the idea of the 3 together being framed as well as artwork.
Yeah, I just think it's a somewhat creative way into actually exploring ink, rather than using, although be it absolutely fantastic swatch cards, and I would certainly consider doing it, but you know, just these are great, but I feel that the time and the effort which goes into actually producing these is certainly worth it. And I have actually got a video online of me exploring those inks on my YouTube channel. So if you guys want to check that out at the end, feel free to do so. Okay, so what we're going to move on to next is I'm going to get some of my Midori paper. And then we are going to have a go on some Midori paper. I'll do it on the back of some paper rather than use a fresh sheet. And again, we'll just see how those inks react on Midori, because that's the whole purpose of this workshop, to explore the full capabilities of your ink. Okay, so let's just put that back into the compass. I'll just do another little colour wheel.
Do you always use a compass for your circles, Andrew? I know we were talking about household items.
No.
Whatever you have to hand as well.
Absolutely, it doesn't have to be a compass. In fact, I started off with not using a compass at all. I'd spend a considerable amount of time actually tracing my circular designs. And the nice thing about tracing is you can be a bit more creative with the shapes which you do. You don't have to do circles. You can do squares, you can do triangles, you can do hexagons, pentangles, whatever you want. You're not limited to just doing circles. It's just that I've actually got to a point where I feel people have become more accustomed with the sort of designs which I do, which is why typically I keep to the circular designs. But you're free to do whatever you want. You could go onto the computer, you can trace your designs on. You know, if you're not an artist, I would certainly recommend tracing, especially if your only sort of intended outcome is to just see what the properties of the ink are in a more artistic manner. I have, again, on the sheet which is attached to today's workshop, I have got a few items which you can trace. I've got a goldfish on there, a couple of Sakura flowers on there. I've got the colour wheels which you can print off and trace, or if you've got a laser printer, you may be able to laser print that onto some watercolour paper and then fill them in. Feel free to use it in whatever way you want.
And we, just for everyone's benefit, if you didn't see, there was a link that you could go to that was in the reminder that came from Zoom about an hour before the workshop, but afterwards we'll make sure we share that again.
Brilliant.
We've got that download. We've got another question actually about whether or not you do anything different when you're exploring shimmer ink.
Yes and no. Shimmer inks, I don't typically keep in a fountain pen. Again, they will react slightly differently dependent on the paper and how absorbent they are. Compasses are tricky, unless, that's a good question. I'll come back to that one in a moment. Please do remind me on that. But back to shimmer inks. I love shimmer inks, but they can be a devil to clean out of fountain pens. So typically I try to apply them with a brush, or if I absolutely must, I will use something like a Pelikan M200, which has got a fantastic unscrewable nib housing, and it's very, very easy to maintain. But you have to be really quite mindful about the pens which you're putting your shimmer and sheening inks in.
Do you have any particular favourites? Shimmer and sheen. I know there's a lot to choose from.
In terms of consistency, I know it's the most recent products out here, but I've done a long-term test on Golden Beryl from the Pelikan Edelstein, and right out the gate, they've really knocked that ink right out of the park. It's absolutely fantastic. The gold particles in there are small enough to not get clogged up in the feed. They've got a really good flow to the ink, and I feel it's one of the very few shimmer inks which you can sort of keep in a pen for some time. So
okay, yeah, good to know.
Absolutely fantastic, and I hope it's not the first and last which they actually produce. That would be an absolute shame. In terms of the compass, I actually just bought one for the which I got from you guys. Is absolutely fantastic. What I love about it is it's got a very nice long needle on the point here. So you may notice that it's quite rigid. I've got a lot of free flow, and having an arm on here is paramount, I have to say. This is one which can only be operated by moving the actual turning circle on here. And it does come with a pencil attachment as well. So let's just get this undone a moment. I promise this isn't a product placement, but this really is it's changed my mind on compasses. I guess it's like the difference between, you know, having a really nice professionally made meal to a microwave meal. The difference of having a really good compass is day and night. Let's try it the other way. It's not going in that way. There we go. So you can use the pencil attachment in here, or you can use the arm. I believe you can also get extension arms for this as well. So if you really want to go to massive circles, you can. Let's just put the other one back in because I will need that one in a bit.
Great demonstration of the compass.
Oh, thank you. I'm not a compass expert.
I don't know.
I'm quite to the point of doing a fountain pen channel on compasses. I don't know if there would be a point in that at all, but
maybe. And what is the blue pen that is next to your hand? Question. Yes, what is that one?
This one is a custom pen from Tamanuri Studios, based in Poland. The pen base is from a company called Wet n Wise, and then Mikhail from Tamanuri Studios did his fantastic urushi work on it. So this is Japanese lacquering at some of its finest. Yeah, I like hand painted and hand crafted products, which is
it's very nice.
Yeah, like painting on pens too. That's maybe another workshop down the line. Why might you want to actually paint your fountain pen?
I think that could be interesting.
Yeah, it's something which is actually starting to take a little bit of traction. I've noticed a few people decorating their pens of late. And I just guess because people like really unique things, pen painting workshop, yeah, I might do. I guess people like to feel unique. You know, it's why people buy limited edition pens. So if you've got the artistic ability to have a go, then yeah, I've got some more pens on the way from Poland at some stage, so that'll be added to the collection down the line. But just love urushi. It's a bit of a passion of mine. Okay, so we've got a few patterns going on in here, and I might actually mix it up with another colour just to be a bit different. So now I'll keep it to diamine just to keep the consistency. So I'm just going to create a few branches in here very quickly. Again, I would spend a little bit more time and care and attention to these whilst doing it myself in my own time and space, but for tonight, it's just a really nice way to get something done quickly by doing this. And you'll notice that actually on this Midori paper, it's again a lot more blue. So if I just let that go for a few seconds, and then it starts going into the green. It's certainly Midori has a lot more range and depth in terms of showing this ink's quality, much more so than perhaps on the Tomoe River or that of the Cosmo Airlight, which I was using beforehand. And I think this is the really fun aspect of looking at quite unique dual shading inks. It's just how they dry. And if you've never tried a dual shading ink, I think you're missing out. Certainly the Ink Studio range from Sailor are really good. And I know those, I believe, do you sell them? The Ink Studio range?
If they're not on site already, they're coming soon.
Okay. So the Ink Studio range has got something like about 300 or more inks in it. And the reason why they use the numbering system is if you've got 300 plus inks in your collection, you're not going to want to name every single one of them. But it does mean it's quite comical when you're trying to actually communicate, oh, I've got 224, I've got 128. And you think, well, what does 128 and 224 look like? But yeah, I digress. These inks are just absolutely superb. 100 inks, okay. So there's a lot of inks in their range.
Yes, I think we are hoping to get those on the website soon. We've been talking to Sailor about those.
Oh, fantastic.
Fab. And actually we had a question about paper.
Yeah.
And just the Midori paper, is that pure white or is that a cream Midori?
It's cream. I don't know if they do a pure white. I'd be interested to know if they do. It's not something I've really looked into, to be honest. It's called Midori MD.
Yes, that's what we've got, and I think everything in the range is cream. I will have a check. Yeah.
But I love this as fountain pen paper. I mean, I've got some sort of like notes on the back, and there's no show through really whatsoever. But you can use it for tracing as well, which I have done in the past. But yeah, it's really, really good paper, and it's quite easy to just tear off and use. Certainly, you know, if you are exploring inks, don't just keep it to one pen width. If you take anything out of this workshop, explore the actual range of nibs. You know, we might all like writing with a particular grade of pen, but when it comes to actually drawing with a fountain pen, keep an open mind, because, you know, I wouldn't typically write with this Pro Gear Slim, but it cuts my work in half when it comes to shading. If I try to do this with my Nikaya, which has got a really, really ultra fine point on it, I would be here forever trying to shade in. So again, it's about having the right tools for the job.
And is that you touched on the preppy the other day? Is there anything, if someone wanted to just get started, for shading in particular, for colouring, are there a range of something that you would recommend as an inexpensive start point? You straight to the preppy.
The preppy is a really good pen. What I love about this is that, okay, they don't have the broader selection of nibs, but if you get something which has got a particularly broad nib on it, you can get it custom ground into something slightly different. I have actually seen people stack the nibs on these, and by stacking, what it means is that they get another preppy, they literally take the nib off that preppy and they stick it on top. And the idea of that is that you can get really ultra wide lines on there. There are custom nib grinders on there which can then do certain particular grinds on them, which can again sort of emulate something like this. And it probably won't cost you the earth to do either. The other great thing about using a preppy is the fact that if I undo the barrel, because this is an all plastic construction, I don't know if you sell rubber O-rings or silicone grease, but if you don't, there are places which do, and you can essentially fill up the barrel with fountain pen ink. So you get the most ginormous amount of ink available. Whether that is something which you might want to do or not is entirely down to you, but these are $5.99, $4.99 thereabouts, and it's such a wonderful writing experience. You know, writing with a pen like this is as pleasant as writing with a pen which costs 100% more. I mean, of course, I don't really want to get into the debate tonight of why you might want to spend more money on a fountain pen, because ultimately, at the end of the day, that is just down to you. But it's certainly the best writing experience you can have, I would say, under £50 with a preppy. It really is that good. Now, the Lamy Safaris are fantastic. They come in around about £15 to £20. Better range of nib choices. So if you are after something like a stub nib or something like that to do your artwork, that's why you might want to look at something a bit more expensive. But if you're happy with like a fine, medium or broad point, preppy is definitely where to start. And they come in these fantastic limited edition colours now.
These are the new limiteds, aren't they? Like the one you've chosen there. It's fantastic.
Yeah, beautiful. So this is the Asa Noha, and it's basically the floral pattern of the hemp flower. And yeah, I love how Japan really celebrates their culture. It's just something else. So let's just get this circle done. And then I'll do the same with the outer circle, and then we'll start on a little bit of artwork if we've got a bit of time. and then I'll talk about how I plan some artwork at the same time and give them some inspiration.
We're up to 7 o'clock, Andrew. So I'm hoping everyone is all right to hang on.
Oh well.
But please let's
time flies, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
Keep
going.
And then we'll go on to doing the more tangible artwork. So assuming that you're happy with getting to this sort of point with your work, it doesn't have to be flowers. You can just keep it to anything you want. You can trace your designs on if you want to go a little bit extra with it. I think you'll feel a little bit happier with your actual swatching abilities. Okay, so let's go on to the artwork itself, if I can find it. Okay, so this is one which I've started recently, and this one is almost using fountain pens for my artwork, but I have started reintroducing some fine liners as well, just to bring some extra definition. I haven't quite got to a point of getting the ultra extra fine nibs, which you can get, but they are quite pricey. Certainly if you need to get them custom ground. So I have actually started using some fine liners as well. And also they're water resistant as well. So if you do actually start off with a fantastic little sketch of your own with a fine liner, you can go over it with a fountain pen and not worry. Yes, Yuka's fine liners can. I don't know how fine the nibs go with Yuka's. Need to actually do some experimentations into that. Okay, so let's grab...
We've got some of those, Andrew, so perhaps we can have a chat about that afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that'll be interesting. I know there are some really good permanent inks out there. So if you are after doing this with a fountain pen ink, Platinum Carbon Black is definitely something I'd recommend. Wouldn't recommend keeping it in your pen. It will block your pen if you aren't using it on a day-to-day basis. So take that into consideration. But there are water-soluble or waterproof inks out there. Okay, so I've started on a basic design. When I say basic, basic for me, with 2 rabbits, a gate. I forget what the technical name for these gates are. And they go down to 0.8. Okay, that's good to know. And then we've got some Sakura petals going down on the background. I like framing my artwork, as you can see on the example here. Just because I think it sort of centralizes the design of what's going on the inside. And all the artwork which I have done in the past, I've always tried to incorporate this sort of design into really focusing the eye in on what the central pattern is, but also having something a bit around the outside just to really push that focus in on the inside. And I have got other examples on my Instagram as well. So what I would then start doing, in fact, I'm just going to do this with the fine liner to start with. I've got pretty much most of the design done on the inside, but what I would then start doing is going in with my fine liner. And if you've not done these Sakura petals before, they're really easy. Simple little flower. And then we just need to do 5 of these. And if it helps, you can make the marks beforehand just to give you a little bit of guidance. Like so. So I'll do one a little bit bigger. So we're going to have a mark here, mark here, mark here, here, and here. So from that point, I can come around quite easily, put my marks in, and that will help me get the spacing for those petals. And certainly they're one of the easiest things you can actually draw. And then for the next hour, I would normally then go around and just do this patterning all the way around, then do connecting branches, just so that again, I really emphasize on that sort of white space and almost having that sort of inverse.
And I'm taking it from this, you wouldn't necessarily sit and do one piece of artwork in one sitting.
Oh
But
gosh,
from,
no.
from the start point to the finish point, how long do you think something like this might take you?
So depending on what you're doing, I can give you a relatively accurate time frame. This ink exploration took about an hour for all three of those little circles. So it's not too long. Something like this, which is a bit more involved on an A5, can take anywhere from 2 hours to 8 hours. It's just really dependent on how much detail you're going into, how many breaks you're taking in between. And then when you're going up to A4, surprisingly, it doesn't take that much longer. It's just really a case of sort of planning your designs and thinking about what you might want to include, the complexity of the objects. So just doing like this Phoenix, for example, took an inordinate amount of time to do.
I'm not surprised, but it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, it is. I think the more time and effort you're willing to put into it, the greater the rewards are at the end of the day. But it is certainly worth considering doing because it really does highlight the qualities and the properties of the ink. But yeah, I mean, it can take us little over time as you want. I mean, you could get little swatch cards, which I've got pre-prepared here. You could do some little designs on the inside. So let's just do a few. And if you wanted, you can then just go in with a paintbrush or your fountain pen and then complete it. Or you can just do it entirely with your fountain pen or start it off with a pencil if you're not that confident. So I've got a HB, I think here. No, 2H. I could go in with a 2H pencil and then do it like this and then go over the top. Of course, if you do that, you are going to double the amount of time. But I would certainly recommend going in with a pencil, especially if it's on a complex object, which you've never drawn before, like the Phoenix.
And how did you create the Phoenix?
So the Phoenix was done based on reference images from Chinese mythology. I looked at some of the sort of standout features like the feathers and the patterning on the main body and on the wings. And then using reference pictures, I then changed it into a pose, which I was happy with. I will give you a basic understanding of how I planned that out, and I'll do that on the back of this. But essentially what you want to do when you're actually planning out artwork, you don't want to go in with your detail. Now, this isn't actually a drawing workshop. It is an ink exploration workshop, but you want to try and find the motion, and it can be just down to a simple curve like so. And from there, you can then start planning out and fleshing out the body. And then using basic geometry, you can then start putting in where the eyes are going to come, where the wings are going to come, how the tail's going to come off. And I'd certainly recommend doing like a rough sketch to start with before going straight in, because there's nothing worse than spending 8 hours on a piece of artwork and you're really focused in on it, only to find out that compositionally it doesn't work. You might come out with a really nice drawing, but composition is key when you're doing artwork. And taking the artistic term of thirds, you really want to try and think about the placement of these objects. So I've got some sort of triangular compositional techniques going on here. So if I just put my pen and pencil down, I've got this sort of triangular sort of technique. So I've still got focal points which are coming from the eye down onto the distant river and then flowing around back onto the Phoenix itself. In fact, what I'll do is I'll just raise my tripod a little bit just so you can actually see it. There we go. So you can see the actual full design. And then I would apply that with anything else I do. If you really want something quite simple to do to start with as a framing objective, let me just get my paper again. That one. There we go. just grab a pen quickly, and I'll just roughly draw a circle. Okay, so your thirds are going to be split like this. Okay, so you want your main sort of focus in one of these thirds, so whether it's here or here. And then you can then do things quite simply like trees, which are going to come around, put your details in, and then have something reflected down in the bottom. And I quite like using the petals sort of cascading down just to help lead the eye onto those various subjects. Tonight has actually helped. I hope that's given you some sort of inspiration to potentially try doing something a little bit different with your swatching and exploring your inks. If you've got any further questions, I am happy to answer them.
We've got I'm just going to switch my camera back on. We've got a drawing and colour theory workshop, please, request. So I think you and I are going to have to catch up on what we do next. Okay,
yeah, I'm happy to do so.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Andrew,
that's fantastic. So I haven't been playing. Normally I draw along, but I've been concentrating on the questions today, so I'm going to have to go off and have a little bit of a practice. For everyone that's still on, I did mention earlier a little bit of a competition, and Andrew was keen to see everyone's artwork. So we would love to see your creations if you've been drawing along today, or if you're going to go off and have a draw and have a go at this later. So please share with us on social media. If you want to tag in Cult Pens, then use the hashtag CultPensCreative. And you can also tag in Andrew using the tag PenFriendsUK. So if you'd like to share your artwork, we would love to see it. I will share that in a follow-up email to you all as well. And Andrew will be picking his 3 favourite creations that everybody shares, and we will make sure that those 3 people get a goodie bag from Cult Pens. And I'm sure it will have some inks in it as a starting point. So please do share your artwork with us. That would be fantastic.
Yeah. Can I just also add to that? You don't have to be an artist, okay? If you want to trace some objects on there, that is absolutely fine, because really the whole point of this is to encourage people to explore the inks they've got in a slightly more creative fashion. So you don't have to be an artist. You can literally trace your designs on. It can be in different shapes and so on and so forth. But really just have fun with exploring your own inks.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, and we love all kinds of artwork, all ages, all levels of experience. So please do share with us. As we mentioned at the beginning, we're recording the session, so we will get that out to you all in the next few days. So you'll have the recording to refer back to if you would like to, and we'll share that on social and on our newsletter as well. That is the end of the session for now. But if you do think of any other questions, please do come back to us, and we'll share those with Andrew as well for any other follow-up. But we look forward to seeing all your creations. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the session. And please follow us on social. There's more workshops coming up on various topics. And from the sounds of it, we'll be running some more with Andrew as well as follow on from this session. So thank you so much for joining, everybody. And for now, have a lovely evening, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye all.
Thanks, Andrew.